Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Cardano and its native token, ADA. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. To be completely honest, I'm not exactly sure the best place to start. You know, the market has moved up a lot in the last few weeks. So I do want to take inventory of that, show where we are, at least within the context of the prior cycle, and talk about potential outcomes and how to hedge in various scenarios. Okay, that is my goal in this video. Now, I think that we are a product of our prior experiences. Right? So our prior experiences really shape who we are. They shape what we're willing to talk about, what we're willing to say, what we're willing to do, right? And so I think to better understand my point of view or where I'm coming from, we should probably first take a stroll down memory lane back to 2019 and 2020 over here. But not to just look at the chart, but to look at just a few of my videos back then, because you'll see kind of what happened and how it sort of shaped me into who I am today, right? So let's just go take a look. It shouldn't take long. Here's the first video. This video was from 2019, and it was Cardano price analysis using logarithmic regression. I don't even know what I said.
Then we can imagine that we might.
The sound is awful, right? I can't believe anyone watched this video.
Come down, touch this orange line again. It's possible that that's going to represent, some of the best long-term buying opportunity.
Okay, enough, right? General expectation was that we would get out of this long accumulation phase and go much higher. And in this video, I drew out a path for ADA going well above where we went, right? But it's so hard, right? Because, you put out a price prediction when it's literally 2 cents, right? 2 cents or 3 cents. It's so hard to know what it's going to do in the future, right? It's impossible to know. No one knows. And if you put out a price that's, a 3 or 4x multiple or a 5x multiple or whatever higher than what ends up happening, you'll never hear the end of it. But it's impossible to know. I mean, like from this level, ADA went up 150x, basically. 100 to 150x, depending on exactly where you got it, right? Whether you got it at like 2 cents or 3 cents, right? Wherever. But it's so hard, right? And so that's one of the reasons why I have reservations about it this cycle is, last cycle I put out all sorts of price predictions. And you'll watch the market go up, but most of the loftier price predictions, sort of those dreams, they never happen. And what ends up happening is the people that watched the video in 2019, they were pleased because they're up 150x, right? But the people that came in 2021 were really pissed off because it didn't go higher than $3, right? So that's one of the reasons why I have reservations about making price predictions today, is because you just simply do not know how high it can possibly go several years in the future, right? So this video was from 2019. I sort of speculated that it would come back down, but I did not think it would put in a lower low, right? I sort of drew out a higher low. I drew some ridiculous logarithmic regression chart. I guess if we were to look at this today, in 2023, I mean, you can see the chart is everything happened on a different time frame, but it's funny because today we essentially have it going to around where it currently is, but I mean, obviously the price, sort of the direction is completely different, right? Going much higher than I thought, coming back down to currently, the end of 2023, around the current price, plus or minus a few cents, right? So I was filled with optimism, right? I was like, all right, well, maybe one more retest of the low, no lower low, and we're off to the races, right? Because I didn't think Bitcoin would put in a lower low. So I'm like, well, if Bitcoin's not going to put in a lower low, then why would the altcoins? Okay. So this was like, this was late 2019. And then, not too long later, we talked about, this golden cross on Cardano, right? I'm not sure if this was in the right order, but yeah. So maybe this one came first. Let me check the price. Yeah, so, I mean, I don't know. One of these, let's just switch this one here. So Cardano, imminent golden cross, right? And I see the videos today, right? People are talking about the golden cross. Like, go look at ADA. Go look at what it's doing right now. What happened? We just printed a golden cross, right? Similar golden cross was printed right here in early 2020, right? And back then, I was excited, right? I'm like, well, life seems good, we didn't really get that retest of the prior or a higher low in 2020. The market was moving higher, right? So why was I so concerned about it in late 2019 that we would have to go back down, right? Because then over here,
the current valuation,
I might be wearing the same shirt actually. That's kind of funny.
Of Cardano could be a thing of somewhat comical in the future if we're able to move out of this accumulation phase that we're in. So now that I've kind of talked about,
so again, I don't really know. I mean, I'm just sort of saying that like that range could be kind of comical in the future if they're able to accomplish everything they wanted to accomplish, right? If you go watch my videos back then, I was very bullish, right? I mean, it seemed like 2 cents, 3 cents, 4 cents was a steal. I'm just like, what's going on? Like, it seems so obvious, right? And back then, I would often just say, well, like anything below 10 cents is fair game. And, I put out more videos, right, as the price climbed higher.
The market has been fairly brutal, for the most part, the last couple of years.
You can see, like, I had no confidence at all, right? Because, I was demoralized, absolutely demoralized from buying ADA at like 12 cents and 13 cents and 14 cents back over here, right? And then watching it just go down and back up and go all the way back down. It was demoralizing, right? I mean, you can see it, you could have seen it in my face, right? I accidentally clicked off the video. But that was what I was talking about, right? And for me at the time, it was like, well, seems like we're done with all this accumulation stuff. It's time to move out. And then what happened is one of the reasons why I've been so reserved today, right? Because then here's a video, Cardano and the current conditions of cryptocurrency. This was from March of 2020, right? March of 2020.
Right, is just, I don't want to only post videos on coins when they're doing well. And of course, we don't do that with Bitcoin and we don't do that with Ethereum because, those are...
It doesn't matter really what I'm saying, right? But the point is like, it was depressing to me because we had just spent all this time in 2019, in 2018, sort of building out a range, all this time putting in higher lows, in fact, only for it to get completely wiped out in the halving year, right? And I get it, like Black Swan, pandemic, we shouldn't necessarily count on that to happen again. But it's because of this experience that has made me so reserved on the altcoin market, right? So reserved. Because I looked, what I did back then, right? I just DCA'd ADA starting in Q3 of 2018, and I was just looking at it, right? I just kept thinking like why didn't I just DCA Bitcoin during that time? Like if you go look at Bitcoin, I would have been so much better off in 2018, 2019, and even early 2020 just buying Bitcoin, right? Like I would have been so much better off because, while ADA here was sitting at a new low. So literally every single purchase I had made on ADA was negative, right? Like I had lost money on every single purchase, every single DCA that I had carried out for basically a year and a half. I had lost money on, and it was demoralizing, right? And I was just like, well, why didn't I just buy Bitcoin during that time? then convert my Bitcoin to ADA at the appropriate time, right? That's what I thought back then. So my goal in this pre-halving year was to try to improve on my own mistakes from the prior cycle, right? And a lot of people give me crap for it, right? You've heard my views on Bitcoin dominance more times than you probably care to count. But I experienced it brutally last cycle, and I wanted to avoid that same mistake this cycle, right? I wanted to avoid it because essentially, what happened last cycle, if you look at 1 over ADA Bitcoin, what I saw happen in that pre-halving year was in January of the pre-halving year, 1 Bitcoin would have fetched you around 85, 90,000 ADA. But by the end of the pre-halving year, 1 Bitcoin would have fetched you 244,000 ADA, right? I could have saved so much of the Satoshi valuation of my portfolio just simply by buying Bitcoin back then instead of buying ADA. Now, that didn't mean there wasn't a lot of money to be made on ADA when it finally turned the corner on Bitcoin. That did not happen until we went back to looser monetary policy, right? Again, if you overlay interest rates onto this chart, you will see that ADA, this inversion of ADA Bitcoin, so the Bitcoin ADA valuation, it did not top until the Fed started cutting rates, right? It did not top until the Fed started to cut. So then that's why I keep saying, right, for the last 2 years, until the Fed cuts, ADA Bitcoin could bleed. And you can see that, this has been going up, right? In September 2021, 1 Bitcoin would have fetched you around 16,000 ADA. Today, it gets you around 97,000 ADA. Okay? It looks very similar to this phase, right? Very similar to this over here. So that is why throughout this entire year, I have said, if you want to buy crypto, you're probably better off buying Bitcoin over ADA in the pre-halving year. It's not like I have anything against ADA, right? The fact that I even talk about it, in my mind, is it just sort of expresses that I have an interest in it, right? If I don't really talk about things that I don't have an interest in. But in my mind, I just wanted to help people avoid the mistakes that I made in the pre-halving year in last cycle, right? So my experiences over here really helped shape who I am today and how I navigate the markets today, what I'm willing to say, what I'm not willing to say, the amount of risk I'm willing to take on. I lived it. I experienced it the hard way in 2018, 2019, and 2020. And I just kept thinking to myself, I would have been better off buying Bitcoin. And then in the halving year, getting into Cardano, right? In the halving year. And look, guys, a lot of people in the Cardano community, honestly, they don't like me because I have been very negative about Cardano with respect to Bitcoin and so on and so forth for the entire year. All I can say is it's never personal. It was only based on my experiences and also my understanding, ignorant as it may be, of monetary policy and how it affects cryptocurrencies. So where does that come in today, right? Where are we today? Well, as of the time of this video, ADA is trading at around 38 cents, right? And I look at this chart and I feel like, it seems so familiar to me, right? So familiar. It's almost like an exact replay of the last cycle so far. Almost an exact replay. You can see it on the chart. So far, it has been almost the exact same thing, right? You have your peak, You get your little, your dead cat bounce in there. You consolidate in Q3, right? You consolidate here in Q3. Everyone thinks that's the low, but it's not, right? Just like we said in 2022, it's not the low, and that it will go down further. Following that, you get your low, your initial low. One of the things you've probably heard me say many times is that altcoins can put in new lows in the pre-halving year, even if Bitcoin doesn't. Bitcoin normally ends the pre-halving year higher than where it started every single pre-halving year. But altcoins can often put in new lows in the pre-halving year. Now, last cycle, ADA did not put in a new low in the pre-halving year. But I knew that it could because I saw other altcoins do it. And coincidentally, ADA put in a new low in June, even though Bitcoin didn't, right? Even though Bitcoin didn't. I mean, Bitcoin was trading at like 25K or something, 30K. And ADA was putting in a new low. So you can kind of see it on the chart, right? And then you have your 1-2 top. Same exact, I mean, it's identical so far, right? Then you bleed. You even get sort of like an intermediate uptrend right here, just like this one, in the context of a downtrend, just like this one. And then you get this, right? And I remember last cycle. Like, I mean, I just remember it so vividly, being like, all right, I'm going to DCA ADA here, or sorry, here and here and here and here and here and here and here. And by March of the halving year, I'm just like, what the hell, man? You know, I was buying it over here when no one seemed to care about it, and I still can't be rewarded for it, right? It's still going down, and it's still putting in a new low. And it didn't just put in any new low. It might not look like much, but from this low here, that was a 36% drop. We didn't know what was coming after this. I mean, you can look on the chart today and be like, oh yeah, great opportunity. But look what we saw. This is what we saw, right? Look what I saw. I mean, you can see what I saw back then. This was what the chart looked like. I had no idea it was going to go do this. Absolutely no idea that that was what was going to come next, right? Not a clue. Even though not that many months before, I drew it out. I even drew out it coming down in early 2020, but I was not anticipating a lower low. So when the lower low came, it made me like question everything. I mean, I didn't sell or anything. I still bought, but it really did make me question, why didn't I just buy Bitcoin during that time? Because at least then my Satoshi valuation would have been preserved. So I feel like I learned a lot of lessons, right? And my goal this cycle was to help people avoid those lessons, avoid the lessons that I had to learn the hard way. And so what I said in Q1 of 2022 was that altcoins are likely going to be too risky for a while. With respect to Bitcoin, they're probably too risky for, 2 to 2.5 years, just like they were last cycle. And I mean, it has honestly been hell dealing with that viewpoint, and every single time, any altcoin rallies, having to sort of face the wrath of crypto Twitter, and it's been brutal. But my only goal was to try to help people avoid the mistakes that I made. So then here we are today, and I look at this chart, and I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, I don't know. Will it continue to play out? Will it not? And you could make a compelling case either way, right? Like, why should I look at this and say that we have to have the same thing? We don't have to. This was a black swan, right? The S&P was dropping like crazy. It was a black swan. Not the fake black swans that everyone calls, anytime their altcoin goes down, but a real black swan where we had a pandemic, hit the world, and every market, essentially everywhere, was just in meltdown mode. So you shouldn't necessarily look at this chart and think that it has to play out. But I can feel I remember how I felt during each of these times. I remember sort of the depression after watching ADA collapse. I remember the highs that I felt at these highs in the pre-halving year. I remember right here in the video. I remember this rally. I'm being like, I was right. You know, all the people that didn't buy it over here, what losers, right? They're getting left behind. And then I felt like an idiot when the recession arrived, when the pandemic arrived that led to a recession. Because I didn't think about it that much, right? I mean, we had an inverted yield curve in 2019. I didn't really care, you know? The only thing people do is when you get an inverted yield curve, everyone just screams recession until eventually they're right? And, you know, this cycle, I mean, I've been clear that I think there's a good chance that at the end of the business cycle, it will end with a recession. I don't know when that's going to be exactly. I didn't even think about it last cycle, and I would have been better off if I had. I mean, maybe if I had, I would have just gotten lucky because, you know, we ended up getting this massive capitulation. There's no chance there's no guarantee that it would have happened, but it did. And we got a lower low. To give you an idea, I mean, about what that would look like, right? I mean, like last cycle, ADA was basically finding these lows at around 25 cents or so, right? 25, I think this was, the low was 27 cents, right? 27 cents. And then this cycle, or sorry, not 27 cents, 0.027 cents, right? So this cycle, these lows are about 10x higher, right? About 10x higher. But then what you'll see is that the final drop put ADA below 2 cents, right? So it ended up going below this low by about 36%, right? Now, we do experience diminishing volatility from one cycle to another, but just to give you an idea, you know, a 36% drop from this low would put ADA at around 14, 15 cents. If we assume there's some type of diminishing volatility and there's still a recession, let's say 20%, it could put it at like 17 to 18 cents, okay? That would be if a recession arrives. I don't know if it's going to. If you take a bar pattern and just kind of overlay it and compress it, because we do have, you know, we don't have as much volatility this cycle, right? And then you just sort of look at it here, and I got to even compress it even more, I guess. I mean, so far it's been an almost carbon copy match, right? Just diminishing volatility. It's not as volatile as what we had back over here. So that's why I've been so cautious on a lot of altcoins, because, you know, I really saw what happened last cycle. I wasn't prepared for it. And I just wanted people to preserve the Satoshi valuation of their portfolio. Just like, well, Bitcoin heavy until looser monetary policy, you know? But as the cycle drags on, it becomes harder and harder to, you know, to continue with those convictions, because, you know, there's like this chance that the market's just going to leave you, right? You know, that the market will just sort of leave you behind. But you also look back at the context of history and say, well, you know, what if it happens again? Like, what if the, you know, a recession arrives in 2024, just as everyone's loading up for the halving, right? The Bitcoin halving. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to happen. How do you hedge, right? Well, I mean, I imagine if you like Cardano, then you probably have a position, right? That's what you probably have. That's the way you hedge, is in case this doesn't happen and you want exposure, you have a position, right? If you don't want to take the risk, then you could stay Bitcoin heavy until looser monetary policy arrives. Because the thing is like, if ADA were to break up to, like, let's say like 40 cents or 50 cents or something like that, there's a good chance that Bitcoin went up too, right? Like, the likelihood, I mean, that's not necessarily true. I mean, if Bitcoin were to just stay at 37K for like 2 months, there's, you know, ADA could still move. But like, suppose that ADA goes to $1 or something, right? Like the only way it's going to do that is if Bitcoin rallied first, right? Like that's the only way it would make it to $1 is if Bitcoin rallied first and continued to show strength, and just kept doing more or less what it's been doing. So if you are risk averse, but you still want exposure to the upside, then you could just keep a Bitcoin heavy portfolio, right? If you want to take on more risk because you don't really care about this Bitcoin dominant stuff, and anyone who does is just, some ridiculous investor that doesn't understand the markets, right? If you don't care about the Bitcoin dominant stuff and all you care about is the USD valuations, which is not necessarily, I'm not trying to say that in a bad way. I mean, that's all I cared about in prior cycles. Then you could have a position, right? And if you don't get this move here, then you celebrate, right? You come dunk on my Bitcoin dominance views if that happens, right? But that is, that's something that I think, is worth considering. And I'm not here to tell you there's a right answer, right? I don't know what the right answer is. I think there's a reason to consider both outcomes, right? To say, well, what if we don't get a recession? And, to think like, well, how do you hedge? But then also to think like, well, what if we do get one and we find ourselves with a lot of altcoins putting in new lows sometime in early 2024? It's a tough position to be in, right? Like, I want no more. I crave that feeling of seeing looser monetary policy and thinking that, all right, finally alts are done bleeding against Bitcoin. Like, I crave that feeling. Like, I see people that are so bullish, just like I was last cycle, right? Just like I was posting all these charts, talking about golden crosses, right? You've seen that recently. I did it too. And then 2020 arrived and all hell broke loose. So I look at the market today and I say, look, I don't know if it's going to play out in the same way. If you like Cardano, you should probably be hedged either way, right? If you want to have exposure to it, then you have to be prepared in case something like this happens. How do you stay prepared for it? Well, it means you keep some cash on hand just in case. There's nothing wrong with having some cash earning 5.5% risk-free in some money market account, in my opinion. Not financial advice, right? But in my opinion. And if this happens, then you have this cash sitting in a money market account you can use, you can capitalize on it. If you were to go look at retail money market funds, people have been piling in to this stuff. It starts to go back down when the Fed pivots, because then the risk-free rate isn't as attractive, so you got to go seek yield elsewhere. And where better to go seek yield than in the assets that have been hammered the hardest, right? Because then the upside is so much more, because then you have all this money flowing back in, like all this liquidity, alts finally bottom out against Bitcoin more durably. It's not just sort of like a single bounce and so on and so forth. One chart I've shown before are the monthly candles. We've even talked about this year. And I even said, like, this is the most likely outcome, right? And it's like, it's playing out, but it's like, no matter what, it's like, it's hard to believe, right? Like, no matter what, it's hard to believe. You get your bear market. You get your bear market. Same thing as always. You get your pre-halving year rally. You got your pre-halving year rally. You then bleed for most of the rest of the year. Same thing over here. Then you get your recession rally. Then you get your recession rally. And then that's where the Fed pivots. It's easy when it's abstract, right? Like when you're sitting over here and you're watching the market bleed, it's easy to say, yeah, you know what? We'll probably get a couple candles that look like this, and then it'll go back down once the recession arrives, right? It's easy when you're not in the market, right? When you're looking at a chart. When you look at ADA over here, if you weren't buying ADA over there, you don't understand the emotions that we went through, right? You just don't, because you weren't over there buying it. You can look at the chart all you want, but you don't know how people felt DCAing this entire thing and then watching it still put in a new low. You know, the people that have given me a hard time this year about these views, and they say, you know, all these great things about ADA, and I'm not trying to say that there's not some positive things about the project. There are. But there were also positive things back over here, as I talked about in some of these videos. In fact, this video, I went on and on about it. I even said at one point, there was a great community. I can't even believe I said that, but I was listening to the video. I'm like, I can't even believe I said that. Because now I feel like, you know, saying that kind of stuff is just so cliche, and it's just like, you know, it doesn't really mean anything, right? Like, oh, we have a great community. I mean, a lot of the communities in crypto are all just the same. Like, there's mixed, you know, everyone's just in all these various projects. But when you're looking at the chart and it's bleeding, it's easy to say, yeah, like we're gonna get a couple of candles like this, and then we're gonna capitulate into a recession. And it's like, all right, well, that's probably going to happen. And then when it arrives, it makes you second guess everything. Like, well, crap. Like, you know, is that it? Is that the bottom? Could be, right? It could be. And, you know, if it is, and you want to buy ADA, it's still not that far off the low, all things considered. Like, imagine if you don't get a recession and then something like this comes after it. You know, like, does anyone look at people that bought ADA right here on this green candle and laugh at did the people that joined crypto up here look at the people that bought right here and laugh at them and mock them because they didn't buy down here? Or do they say, damn, that was a good price, right? This came after it, though. Will it happen again? I don't know. The market is saying that the first rate cut isn't going to happen until May, I believe. And this thing keeps going back and forth. Sometimes it says not till June. I can also tell you the market has no clue what it's talking about, because the odds have changed every single month for the last 2 years on what's going to happen. You know, at one point, the market was pricing in hikes all the way up to, you know, 6%. At another point, they were pricing in cuts starting at like 4%. Market has no clue what's going to happen. This could change overnight if the unemployment rate were to print like north of 4% next month, right? If the unemployment rate goes like 4.2% or something and surprises way to the upside, this thing will likely, you know, that'll flip these rate cuts much sooner probably. You know, forget May. You could have a rate cut in January or March, which would be funny if that happened, because January or March would be right before the halving, which is exactly where ADA bottomed last cycle, 2 months before the halving. So I'm here to say, just want to be open, honest as I can, right? I've been very critical about a lot of altcoins this year because I expected them to bleed against Bitcoin. I have no regrets in that view. It has been the correct view, even though it's not a popular one. Bitcoin dominance is legitimately, I mean, look at these monthly candles on dominance. How can you say that this is not a bullish move? Look at the weekly candles on Bitcoin dominance. Not a single weekly close below the bull market support band, which consists of the 20-week SMA and the 21-week EMA, for the entire year. There was one single wick below it in January. Not a single weekly close below it all year long. As much as you like ADA, as much as you like it, as much as, you know, you think it's going to go higher, and it could, and, you know, it could over the next couple of years, you still would have been better off with Bitcoin this year. There's no denying it. There's absolutely no denying it. You can look at the ADA Bitcoin valuation and see that pretty clearly, right? There's just simply no denying it, because if you look at where it came into the year, it was around 1,600 sats. And back then I said it's likely going to go to 800 sats by the summer. I was laughed at, right? I was laughed out of the off crypto Twitter, essentially. Then it went to 800 sats, which back in early 2022 is where I said the best case scenario would be. But once it got here, I was fairly convinced, and I kind of still am to some degree, that it could go lower, right? The reason I think it could go lower is because, again, we still haven't reached looser monetary policy yet. If you look at all prior tightening cycles and where the Fed paused, the average length of a pause is 8 months. I think when I was looking at it, 8 months puts you in March. So the average length of a Fed pause before they start to cut is about 8 months. 8 months puts you in March because you can see they paused here in July. Well, technically they raised rates in July, but that's where the pause officially started because that was the last raise, and then from that point they didn't do anything after that. So if you were to go over here and let's just flip this over to months, you can see it's already been 4 months. March gets you to 8 months, which is the average length of time of a pause before the Fed starts to cut. Last cycle, if you look at this, they only paused for 6 months. And then that was why ADA Bitcoin bottomed out in August, because they had already paused. Once they pause and then start to go back to looser monetary policy, once you get rate cuts, that's when riskier assets like altcoins can find a durable bottom against Bitcoin, assuming they're not going to become a relic of a prior cycle. It is so hard predicting which altcoins will actually go to new all-time highs. For every one that does, that then develops survivorship bias for it, there's like 100 that don't. I feel pretty happy that last cycle, all the altcoins that I picked went to new all-time highs. Cardano went to new all-time highs. Chainlink went to new all-time highs. If you want to call ETH and all, it went to new all-time highs. They all went to new all-time highs. But so many of them didn't put in new highs. Well, look at the ADA Bitcoin chart. This is what it looks like, right? It's just more or less just been down only since September of 2021. So I want to be open-minded to where this thing could bottom. The problem for me is that it literally just put in a new low less than a month ago, And guys, I know people saying all sorts of bad things about me on Twitter, but the people that I've gotten into arguments with about ADA Bitcoin going lower this year, yes, they've celebrated every single pop to the upside, but it's like, how can they claim they were right when it put in a new low not even a month ago, right? ADA has been bleeding back to Bitcoin all year long. But I don't like being the bad guy anytime it does this, right? Like anytime it gets a pop, I'm the bad guy, right? It's hard. It's really hard because I want to see Cardano succeed. Like I'm not anti-Cardano. I just, I know what happened last cycle. So we'll see, we'll see what happens. I think the thing to look for is if it does come back down, which there's no guarantee, right? But if it does come back down, can it hold this low at 800 sats, or does it break down? One of the things that I was actually bullish on, I know gasp, was, and I said this in the last few videos on ADA, was I said that ADA Ether would likely have some type of reversion to the mean, because we sort of noted that if it is in this downtrend channel, which again, don't take it up with me. Like I don't necessarily, I don't make the chart what it is. It is what it is. And, ADA Ether has been putting in lower lows. And I said, well, this wick here could be, a point where ADA starts to gain back on Ethereum. And it has. Now the key thing to look at is it's back to where it was, back to where it broke down. There's no guarantee that it can break out here. I have no problem if it breaks out here. Absolutely no problem. Right? I think Ether Bitcoin should bleed a lot. Honestly, I think Ethereum needs to bleed against Bitcoin quite a bit. To be completely honest, right? But at this point, by the way, guys, as much as you might like Cardano, I don't see it flipping Ethereum. I don't. And I said that last cycle too, and people said all sorts of things. But guess what? It never flipped Ethereum. And I don't think it's going to this cycle either. But I also don't think Ethereum is going to flip Bitcoin. we always fall into these narratives, these traps of like thinking that like, all right, well, this has to flip this. What if the status quo just remains the same, right? What if the status quo just remains the same? That's probably the most likely outcome, right? We can dream, you can dream about what it would be like, but the reality is it's probably not going to happen. You're probably better off assuming that it won't happen, taking profits when it gets close, when people start talking about it more, and then just joining back in once no one's talking about it again. So, I look at this and I say, well, I don't know if it's going to break back above this or not, but that's at least a key thing to look for. And I was bullish on the ADA ETH. I said there's a good chance you will get some type of mean reversion here over the next few months and see it go back up. And it did, right? I mean, I expected ADA to gain against Ethereum basically ever since this capitulation back in June, because, I mean, just the integrity of the downtrend channel, just to help it remain intact, right? You needed some type of mean reversion, right? But you'll notice that there was a low put in late 2019, and then a lower low was put in the first part of the halving year. So if ADA Ether gets rejected and it comes back down here, that could be sort of a macro low to where then it actually like sort of bounces back up to the top of the channel, right? But I don't know, we won't know if this happens until, sometime in the first half of 2024. So then what causes ADA to drop, right? I mean, like, what would it be? I don't know. I mean, it could be a recession. One thing about recessions, and again, like you'll get yourself into trouble if you constantly try to predict when it's going to happen, right? My view that I've said a lot over the last 2 years, at least the last year and a half, is that the earliest it will arrive will be the late 2023, or it could be in early 2024. That has been my view, but I'm open to amending that view if it doesn't seem like it's playing out. I'm not in the business of trying to predict exactly when it's going to happen. People wait forever for stuff to happen, and it happens way beyond when they think it's going to. A lot of people said that we were in a recession back in the first half of 2022, but I don't really buy that, considering that we were at historic lows in the unemployment rate. But, if you're not really familiar with what I'm talking about, if you look at treasury yield spreads, right? Like, so if you look at the inversion of the 3-month and the 10-year yield, you will see that we actually had an inverted yield curve back in 2019, right? Back in 2019. And then it uninverted. And then we got a recession. Yes, a black swan event. But that's kind of the thing, isn't it, right? If there is a recession, it's always going to be blamed on something, right? Like this recession over here, right? You'll always find a reason that it's going to happen, and this one over here. There's always something. It's never just, oh, it happened because the economy is weak, and we know the economy is weak because the yield curve suggests it. It makes no sense that you can lock in it does make sense when you think about where the economy is, but it theoretically, in good economic times, it would make absolutely no sense that you could get a higher yield, a higher annualized yield in a lower duration treasury than a higher duration treasury or a longer duration treasury. It'd be like, I know ADA doesn't have, sort of like lockup. I mean, you can unstake it, whatever, but like imagine if it did, right? Like imagine if you could pick how long you stake it for, and then you can't actually access it until that time period. Like, so imagine you stake some for a month and then some for 2 months. When you have an inverted yield curve, basically it's saying, all right, for the 1 month, you're going to get a higher annualized yield than for the 2 months. You're like, well, that doesn't make sense, right? If you're going to lock your stuff up for longer, you should get a higher yield. But you don't right now, right? You don't. And I mean, you can go see that right here. Like, go look at the yield curve. You don't get a higher yield. The short end of the yield curve is much higher than the long end. We actually had a steepener not too long ago, but it was because the long end was going up, not because the short end was going down. When the short end goes down, it means something in the economy has been broken, and the Fed needs to pivot to fix it, to go back to looser monetary policy, so that all these riskier companies don't all go bankrupt, right? It's the same reason why, like the Russell, if you go look at the Russell 2000, think about it like altcoins, like this is altcos, like alt companies, divided by the S&P, and I've said this many times, but you'll see here that the Russell did not bottom out last cycle, until the last rate cut. Until the last rate cut. You can think about it like similar like the Bitcoin dominance, right? Like the relatively safer S&P 500 was outperforming the Russell until the Fed started cutting rates aggressively, right? So that's kind of the idea. But when you look at the yield curve, it's inverted still. The problem is that when you go back to prior recessions, when it was inverted, it meant recession was going to happen eventually. And I didn't tell you exactly when. Told you it was going to happen eventually, right? Here's the one before the dot-com crash. Here's the one before the financial crisis. And then here's the one today. And again, looking at Treasury yield spreads, you can see, this is the 3-month and the 10-year, we can be inverted for a long time before a recession arrives. Right? There's no way to know exactly when it's going to happen. And here you can see we were sort of on the path to inversion, and then we've come back down here, which I think to some degree could be due to Yellen issuing shorter duration than the market was expecting. I said that. I made a video on it. I said that's actually both bullish for stocks and bonds at the beginning of the month, and it has been, right? Like stocks are up 10% or more. Like the S&P is up 10%. The bond market, like TLT is up 5 or 6%. And so it was bullish. And it was bullish for stocks and bonds and crypto, I guess. So going back to ADA, I guess I'd like to summarize it like this. My intentions this year have not been anti-altcoins by any stretch of the imagination. My intentions were to help protect the Satoshi valuation of portfolios. Because I saw my own Satoshi valuation, the Bitcoin valuation, get wrecked in 2018, 2019, and 2020. I would have been so much better off ignoring altcoins until looser monetary policy. Yes, I would have missed out on some crazy rallies in the altcoin market. But I didn't care, right? I didn't care. If you think the Fed will engineer a soft landing, which is theoretically possible. If you look at Treasury yield spreads, we had an inverted yield curve in 1966 and no recession. Now, unfortunately, we still got a recession, but it waited another 2 years. And the S&P put in, unfortunately, a lower low. And then it put in another lower low 4 years after that, right? I don't really want to see an inflationary decade like the 70s, where you just go put in higher highs and lower lows for 10 years. I prefer not to see that. The way that we don't see that is by the Fed doing what they need to do and keeping monetary policy tight for as long as they can to crush inflation. Because once inflation is crushed, then we can go into a more durable phase of economic expansion as we go into slightly looser monetary policy that's probably not as loose as we had last cycle, in the hopes that inflation doesn't come roaring back. So if you think that the Fed will engineer a soft landing in 2024, then I can understand why these valuations are attractive, right? And the way that you can say, all right, makes sense to have some. If you think that a hard landing arrives in 2024, like 2020, then you probably want to stay Bitcoin heavy just in case, right? And the reason you stay Bitcoin heavy is a hedge, because if there is no hard landing, Bitcoin leads the bull market, not altcoins. But if there is a hard landing, altcoins will bleed out more. So if you're a soft landing proponent, the way you hedge is you have ADA, but you also have some cash as a hedge in case this goes down, in case the hard landing occurs. If you're a hard landing proponent, then my argument is that, well, you just have Bitcoin because, or you either are 100% cash or you have cash and Bitcoin. My preference is to have cash and Bitcoin, right? I also have some. I have stake pools, right? It's not like I don't have any ADA, but This is ADA from, from last cycle. So if you're a hard landing proponent, then the way you hedge, generally speaking, in my opinion, would be you would have a Bitcoin heavy crypto portfolio to give you exposure to the potential upside, but minimize your downside risk in case the hard landing occurs. If you want to have a hedge with ADA, even if you're a hard landing proponent, I can understand that view too. Okay? I'm going to try to become less rigid in my views, especially as we get out into the halving year, because the longer we go on, then the risk becomes to the upside, right? But I still can't shake this feeling of like, well, when are we going to get the resolution of the yield curve? I don't know if we can go into a bull market like this, right, while the yield curve is looking like this. Maybe we can, I don't know. Maybe we can. But I would tend to believe that we need some type of resolution there at some point, just so we can get back to looser monetary policy and higher risk assets don't just bleed against lower risk assets forever, right? Where even the Russell 2000 can maybe start to outperform Apple for a while, because we know that hasn't happened in a long time, right? And same thing goes with altcoins. So that's my non-financial advice. I hope that you can understand the views that I've communicated this year. I hope that I haven't, been too overly critical of altcoins, but I can understand why you might think that. My motivation has come from my own experiences where I was super bullish, even expecting a higher low, got excited about a golden cross, and then the recession arrived. And I thought Bitcoin heavy would have been so much better. This cycle, I wanted to communicate what I learned the hard way to everyone else so that you could better navigate the cryptoverse. And if you had converted your your altcoins to Bitcoin in Q1 of 2022, which is when I said was the when altcoins were not worth the risk anymore. Yeah, I mean, even missing the absolute low, right? But even if you just did it in say like February, right? If you converted your ADA to Bitcoin and then you converted it back today, I mean, you're literally getting 3 times the amount of ADA, and all you had to do was sit in Bitcoin for the last 2 years. That's all you had to do. You didn't have to worry about the USD valuation of Bitcoin, even though it went all the way down to 15K and then now back up to 38K. All you had to do was get out of alts, put it into Bitcoin, wait, convert back. Magic, you have 3 times the amount of ADA, right? Shouldn't be such a controversial viewpoint, but it is. So I guess what I will say is, going forward, I'm not going to be as rigid in my views. Ideally speaking, I'm not promising that I won't occasionally fall back into it, but I will say that I think my strategy for me has worked out, but I understand for other people why they don't like it, but that's where I stand. I'm a product of my past experiences. I see the people that are bullish today, and that was me 4 years ago. That was me. And you should follow these people, right? Because we might not have a recession. There's several good people that put out videos, and they sort of focus on Cardano. I actually pulled a couple of them up, so go check them out. You have Crypto Crow. He talks about Cardano all the time. And then you also have Crypto Capital Venture. They both talk about Cardano. I think that's mostly what they talk about. So go follow those guys. Okay? Go follow those guys. Look to see what they're saying about ADA. If we don't get a recession next year, then the sort of the bullish view is probably the correct view. If there is a recession, then you're likely going to get one final sell-off, is my guess, just like we got in 2020. So we'll see if that happens. No promises, right? Fractals are made to be broken, right? Fractals don't play out forever, so don't assume that just because it's playing out like this so far that it has to play out like that forever. Normally, by the time we notice these fractals, they stop playing out anyways. So you certainly shouldn't take it to the bank, because I know they're not going to cash it in. But just look to see what happens over the next couple of months. And if you want to get a position in altcoins, of course, you're free to do that. Just understand what the downside risk is if a recession arrives. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up. And again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. We'll see you guys next time. Bye.